Greetings, Eric the Racket Scientist here. So if you clicked on this video, you're interested in seeing my large collection of over 50 rackets. And you may be asking yourself, really? More than 50 rackets? That seems like a lot. And yeah, they're always right behind me here, so I'm about to go over this collection with you today. Now I'm doing this video because I recently went on a trip to Taiwan and China where I actually bought quite a few rackets. And I figured, hey, I might as well go over my collection before I bought those rackets, just so you guys can see what rackets I have. Now before I get started, I do want to mention that all of these rackets are bought with my own money, and I do not have any partners or sponsors. Collecting and reviewing rackets is simply a hobby to me. Well, you could say that playing badminton is a hobby to me as well, but I would consider this almost like a separate hobby. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go brand by brand, but I'm not really going to order the models within the brands. So jumping right into it, here I have the NanoFlare 700 Pro. A lot of you guys will know that I have this racket because I actually did a full review on it recently. And something that I really like, I've used it in a couple tournaments so far. Very versatile, very fast racket, easy to use and pick up. Next up, we have the latest generation 88S and D Pro. Now, especially the 88D Pro has been a very popular racket recently because it's a very versatile, fast, and attacking racket. The 88S is also really good. It's very easy to use and fast, but for me personally, I have a little bit of trouble generating backline power with it. But the 88D Pro definitely solves that problem. It's super versatile, fast, great to play with. Both of these are JP coated, so they are from Japan, which is really nice. Okay, so next up, a lot of people will recognize this as the Dora Z Strike. Now, this is actually one of my favorite Yonex rackets of all time because of how versatile and how stable it is. These are both JP coated, but one of them is in better condition than the other. So actually one of these I bought myself for my birthday, brand new, but still several years after it had been discontinued. And because it's in perfect condition, I kind of get a little nervous playing with it sometimes. So I actually picked up this other Z Strike on the used market that has a bit of chips on it, so I'm not really afraid to play with it. So next we'll have another name that some people will recognize, and that's the Voltric 80 and Voltric 80 E-Tune. These are some pretty famous power rackets from the Yonex lineup. I don't play with these too often, but they're fun to take out once in a while. So next I have this pair of Nanospeed 9900. Now this is a bit of an older racket. These were popular actually when I was growing up playing badminton. After they discontinued the original Nanospeed 9900, they actually did a rerun of it several years later. So this is an original one, and I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but it has kind of the original orange paint to it. Unfortunately, this one has a crack in it and it's been repaired. And visually, it's very difficult to tell that it's been repaired, and this is a model from the rerun. We'll notice that the paint is more on the red side and there's some gold accents to it. So next I have something pretty cool, and this is a Voltric Z-Force 2 Lindan Red edition. Now Z-Force 2, very famous racket, very highly sought after. This is a little more of a collector's item to me. I don't play with it that often. I really do like this racket, but I want to keep this in good condition because it's so special. And finally, we have an original Arc Saber 11 in the second colorway. This is one of my favorite rackets from the last generation Yonex. Overall, very easy to use. And one thing I should mention about the 3U Yonex rackets that I have, in the United States, Yonex actually used to sell their 3U rackets with the G4 grip by default, and G5 was actually not available in the US. So my original Z Strikes and Arc Saber 11s that I owned were all G4 grips, but I spent some time over the years trying to look for ones with G5 grips because I like that better. That's why both of my Z Strikes are from Japan, and the Arc Saber 11 is also for G5, although I think my Nanospeed 9900s are still G4 grips. So what I don't have in my Yonex collection right now, Arc Saber 11 and Arc 7 Pro, are rackets that I did own, but I sold earlier this year to a friend. Now I like those rackets, but I just wasn't really using them enough, and I felt that my friend could use them more. However, I do really like the Arc Saber 11 Pro, and if I have another chance to buy one, then I probably will. Also missing is the Astrox 77 Pro. Now, if you watch some of my stuff, you might know that I really like this racket as well. But unfortunately, I don't have it in my collection right now because sometime last year I lent it to a friend who accidentally broke it. And then they went and got me a new one from Taiwan, but then I broke my finger and got injured and I couldn't play. And then they wanted the 77 Pro, so I sold it back to them, and then they broke that one as well. Anyways, long story short, I don't have a 77 Pro right now, but it's definitely one that I will try to pick up once I have the chance. So with Yonex out of the way, of course, we're going to move on to Victor. And although Yonex is definitely the most well-known badminton brand, you might be surprised to know that I actually have more Victor and more Li-Ning rackets than I do for Yonex rackets. So let's start with thruster rackets. This is actually the line I have the least of. I only have two, which is the Thruster Ryuga 2, not the Ryuga 2 Pro, the first iteration of the Ryuga 2. And I have the Thruster F Ultra as well. I also used to own a Ryuga Metallic, but I sold that one. Ryuga 2 is a really approachable racket, and I actually used to use this for singles for a while. Anyways, moving on to DriveX. So some of you may know I actually did a review on the DriveX 10 Metallic. So if you saw that video, you'll know that I have a DriveX 10 Metallic and also a DriveX Metallic, which is kind of like a mid-tier racket. But I also have this pair of DriveX 9X that I picked up this year. I bought these off a friend, but fun fact, they were actually bought together, so their serial codes are only one number apart. And I also got this DriveX 8S, which is one that a lot of people don't really know about. The DriveX series is kind of weird because there's a lot of variation between the rackets. Some of them have free core handles, some of them do not. Some of them have the metallic shaft and some of them do not. And then on my recent trip to Taiwan, I also picked up a DriveX 12, so I basically have every single DriveX racket. All right, let's go with R-Speeds next. Here I have the R-Speed 90K Metallic. This is a really awesome racket. I actually really like how this one feels and handles. It can be a bit demanding at times, but I find it to be very precise. And then here I have two special ones. So here I have a R-Speed 100X. 2024 Thomas Uber Cup Finals Panda Edition. And then here I have the 100X Ultra, which is the 2024 World Tour Finals Edition. Yeah, from Hangzhou. So both of these special edition, so pretty unique. Although ironically, even though they're special edition, I actually don't use these rackets that much. I also have this R-Speed HS, and this is not the HS Plus, but the original HS. I intended to pick up the HS Plus, but I didn't really have the chance. I couldn't find it in Taiwan. But I actually really like this original HS. It's very forgiving and it's surprisingly easy to use. And then finally, fun one, let's talk about Brave Sword. So starting here, I have the Brave Sword LTD Pro. So this is the latest Brave Sword and maybe the last, although you keep thinking that the Brave Sword line is dead, but then they keep making more. Like there was the Brave Sword 50th anniversary, which I don't have. I haven't owned that one. But then this Brave Sword LTD Pro. And then here we have a classic Brave Sword 12. I've actually owned a lot of these. I've owned 4 of them in the past, so this will be my 5th. And then finally a real classic, which is Brave Sword 10. And then when I was growing up, this is actually what I used, Brave Sword 10 in 3U. And this was kind of the popular Victor racket around when I was growing up. And so one of these is from back then, and it had to be repaired because it had a crack in the frame. But the repair is pretty good, and visually it's almost impossible to tell where it is, although certainly you would be able to feel the vibration or the weight differences. But I also managed to track down this brand new Brave Sword 10 recently, even though it was discontinued more than 10 years ago. And I'm definitely going to do a comparison video on these Brave Swords, so... Alright, so now we'll move on to Li-Ning, and I have quite a lot of Li-Ning rackets. I think they make a lot of interesting rackets, so let's get right to it. So we'll start with Blade X, which I only have one Blade X racket, and that's the Blade X 900 New. I mainly picked this up because I thought it looked cool, but I haven't actually played with it too much recently. And I think this is a kind of an interesting one that compares to the NanoFlare 800 Pro. Okay, next up is Aeronaut rackets. So first I have this Aeronaut 7000i. This is one that I basically never use, and I kind of use it as a loaner racket. I just give it to people, but I bought this simply because I thought it was very pretty, and that's literally the only reason I bought it. I also have this Aeronaut 6000, which is both the 6 and 7000 are kind of lower mid tiers rackets, but I also I bought this Aeronaut 6000 alongside an Aeronaut 9000C, which is the famous racket that Yuta Watanabe and Ong Yu Sin used, but I sold the 9000C and I kept the 6000 because it was cheap, and again, I'll use this as a loaner racket. I also own the plain Aeronaut 9000, the racket that Ginting used before he switched to Axe Force 100. Oh yeah, almost forgot, I do have a Tectonic racket. Here's a Tectonic 9, which is, but yeah, this is a very interesting one, and I actually find it somewhat comparable to Z-Force 2. It's not exactly the same, but... So next we'll have the Halbertech series, and this is Li-Ning's newest line. And I have to be honest, I think this is my favorite looking lineup of rackets of all time because each of them has kind of a half-half color frame. And, you may or may not be a fan of each color individually, but I think as a series, they look really cool together, all with the very similar design. Now I'm a pretty big fan of this series. They're all fast attacking rackets, very smooth, all fully recessed. And it's a good balance between power and speed, and they all tend to handle really well. Now I've heard there's a few Halbertech rackets coming out in 2026 next year, so I'll be keeping my eye out for that, and I'll probably try to pick them up if I can. And so that brings us to Axe Force, which is probably my favorite series in the Li-Ning lineup. So I have here an Axe Force 70. But yeah, this is a very easy to use, kind of a bit of a flexi racket, really good lazy day racket for me. Then we have the Axe Force 100, and so this is kind of what Ginting used to use before he switched to Victor. This is a really interesting one, and it's got a very short and responsive shaft. This is a very gorgeous looking racket. I also think that Li-Ning came out with this to directly compete with the Yonex 100ZZ because it has very similar specifications. They have the same length shaft. They're both extremely thin shafts. Both have slightly compact frames with fully recess. I haven't gotten to try them side by side, but it would be interesting to do so. And then finally, my favorite, the Axe Force 80. And you'll know this is my favorite because I have this many of them, which is, I have 8 of them. So I have 2 3U versions, and then I have 6 4U versions, one of which is broken and repaired. The 3U I actually really like for singles, and I would use one of the 3U ones for my singles drills a lot because it's pretty heavy, but it kind of enforces good technique in my mind. But the Axe Force 80 is one of my favorite rackets of all time. And by favorite, I don't necessarily mean the one I play the best with, but it's definitely the one that I enjoy playing with the most. Now your mileage may vary. I think this is a very controversial racket, and a lot of people don't play well with this racket because it's got a very specific set of specifications which make the technique needed to use this racket kind of unique. Like the Axe Force 80 is very head heavy and it has a box frame, so it has a very laggy and whippy feel to it. So a lot of people aren't going to be able to use this and time it well, but I personally really love how it feels. And I really love the contact feeling that it makes when you contact the shuttle. And the reason I have so many is because I do intend to do like a string comparison video in the future. And so having 6 of the same racket is going to help a lot towards that, and to be able to compare them side by side on the same day with the same racket. And then in terms of Axe Force, I also used to own the Axe Force 90 Tiger, but unfortunately that was one that I couldn't really get to work with. I didn't really like it that much. But if you watch my video of what rackets I got in Taiwan and China, you'll know that I actually got the Axe Force 90 New. So I'm really excited to compare that to the other Axe Force rackets. All right, so with that out of the way, next we're going to do Mizuno. Now I really like Mizuno rackets because they tend to have really good build quality, and I think it's a little unfortunate that they're hard to get here in the United States because I think they make really good rackets. Very consistent quality control and very good build quality. So let's start out with what's trendy from Mizuno right now, which would probably be their Acro Speed series. This is kind of their current Speed series rackets. And there's quite a few models. Like for example, the Acro Speed 1, there are 3 variations of this model, which is the Acro Speed 1 Focus, Acro Speed 1 Excel, and Acro Speed 1 Drive. And they all have slightly different specifications. There's also an Acro Speed 0, which is kind of a flagship of that series. And then these are all excellent rackets, so if you get the chance to try one out, definitely do. And here I have a Fortius 11Q. Now you might not recognize this one because usually the Fortius series tends to be like just black rackets, but this is a limited colorway special edition Fortius 11Q in white, and specifically matte white, so this is a very beautiful racket. I've heard that this is a little different than the normal 11Q, but I can't confirm that because I haven't had them side by side. But I have actually owned 2 or 3 of the original black color Fortius 11Q, and that's a really nice racket. And then another Fortius, so this one's interesting. This is a Fortius IJ2, which is a Taiwan exclusive racket. I picked this up because I saw it online and I didn't really know what it was, and so I had someone buy it for me, and I turned out to really like it. It's kind of like an even balance with a box frame, which is kind of an unusual setup, but it's really fun to play with in my opinion. I think it's kind of strange that it's Taiwan exclusive only because it's a nice racket, and you know, I would certainly like to see this available in more places. And not pictured, but I have owned in the past, like I mentioned, I had some Fortius 11Qs before, but I also owned an Altius 01 Feel, and that was kind of a nice racket. I did enjoy playing with it and I liked how it felt, but I just didn't really have any niche in which I would really use it. I was mainly using it as a racket to help with coaching because it was so soft. But anyways, yeah, after going to Taiwan, there are a lot of Mizuno rackets that kind of made it on my radar. And there's a few more that I definitely want to pick up, such as the Acro Speed 2 and then the new Acro Force series, which I did pick up the new Acro Force 100, but I'm also interested in the Acro Force 300 as well. Okay, so next we're gonna go with Redson, which is arguably my favorite brand. They make some really interesting rackets. Unfortunate thing is that they tend to not be really readily available in a lot of places. I mean, here in the US, they're only available at one retailer, which is up here in Seattle, and that's kind of how I found them. Well, they are reasonably popular in Taiwan. You can get them there, but outside of there, it's not really kind of a well-known brand. But anyways, let's start with this Redson Shape 01 MG. And this is probably, it is one of my favorite rackets, but it is also one of my most used rackets of all time. Now, I've used this racket for basically everything. I've used it for tournament and men's doubles, mixed doubles. I use it in club play. This is like probably my favorite all-around racket of all time. I use this in basically any situation. So this is, I guess I would say, is my comfort pick. Now, a lot of the Redson rackets that I have that I'm going to show you have this so-called grommetless design or grommetless technology. And what that means is for the single pass holes kind of on the top and the sides of the frame, there's actually no grommets. Like the string sits directly on the frame, and that translates to a really direct and visceral contact feeling. And I really, really like that. And that's part of the reason why I really like Redson rackets. So 01MG, I have two of these blue ones, and I own the white one, which I sold. But in Taiwan, we recently bought another pair of white ones, and I say we because it's mainly for my wife. All right, next we have the Redson Shape SG, and this is also a very excellent one. I've also used this a lot in tournament, and it also has the grommetless design. Although this one is fully recessed, unlike the MG, and this has a sword frame. So this definitely swings faster and is more powerful. And the trade-off is a little bit of the stability. The SG was actually the first Redson racket that I bought. One thing I should mention is that the SG and the MG that I own, they're all 3U. Because these rackets aren't particularly head heavy and they're not super stiff. So in order to kind of get that stability and power, I find that having the 3U version kind of helps. All right, so next we have the Redson RG08. And so this is a newer racket in their lineup. And this one does not come in 3U, so I have these in 4U here. But these are essentially sword frame rackets. They're not fully recessed, but they're supposed to have very rigid heads, so kind of similar to the SG. RG08 comes in two flavors. There's the AQ and CQ, the AQ being more of supposedly an aggressive one and the CQ being a comfort one. And you may be wondering what the difference is between the two because it took me a long time to figure out. If you look at the catalog, the specs are exactly the same. And after observing very closely, I figured out the difference is in the head shape, and it's very, very small, so you wouldn't even notice it unless you directly stack them on top of each other. And the AQ has just an ever so slightly smaller frame. It's only on the order of like 1 or 2 millimeters. And then finally we have the newest Redson racket, the Shape ESG, and this is kind of the ultimate flagship of the Shape series. This has used all of the technology from all of the other rackets, and some interesting things about this racket is that, first of all, not only is it fully recessed, this is like the most beautifully recessed frame you're ever going to see because this has 0 grommets. And for the other rackets that I just showed you, they do have the grommetless design where all the single pass holes are grommet free. This one has literally no grommets on it whatsoever, not a single one. And the manufacturing and the form of this racket is just absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. And you do feel that in the gameplay. This is a very, very smooth racket. Now, the caveat is that you have to be very careful of who you give these rackets to string. Most stringers won't be able to easily string a grommetless design racket unless they have done it before. And especially this ESG, I caution you, if you bring this to your stringer, they have to string it in a 2-knot style. And there's a very specific way you need to string this, or else you might be in danger of warping the frame or even breaking the frame. So, and that's because there are no grommets. And normally the knot rests on the grommet, but here there are a couple designated holes where the knot is supposed to sit, and you cannot put the knot elsewhere. So you definitely want to take this to an experienced stringer or someone who has strung this racket before. Okay, so that mostly makes up the bulk of my collection. The rest of my rackets are just one or two odd rackets from each brand, so I'm gonna just kind of do these together. So first up we have Gosen, in which I have two of the Gosen Inferno rackets. Now the reason I bought this is because the Gosen Inferno racket is known for having this really weird wavy sword frame, and if you want to see it closer, just look it up. It's really crazy looking. This is a really nice series, and I have the Gosen Inferno EX here, which I really like. On the other hand here, I have the Gosen Inferno Smart, which is kind of a slightly more headlight version, but I really like both and they're cool, and I think there are 4 or 5 models in the Gosen Inferno series total. I know there's an Inferno Raid, which is head heavy, and I know there's an Inferno Air, which is like a 5U, a really light version. I actually really like Gosen rackets. I think they make some really interesting stuff, but their production runs are just so inconsistent, and it's really hard to find Gosen stock even when you actually go to Taiwan and Japan. Yeah, so next from Fellet. So here I have a Fellet woven TJ Power, and I haven't really gotten a lot of court time with this racket, but some interesting things. It has a very interesting looking T-joint, which is I guess what the TJ stands for. It also has a max tension of 42 pounds, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't think I'll be stringing it to anything even close to that. And then finally from 100, which is kind of the new brand that's been getting traction in the US. Here I have a 100 Battle 700. And I just picked this up because I was curious about 100 rackets in general. And it was relatively cheap, and this is a pretty nice, easy to use racket. Although the quality control leaves a little bit to be desired, there's a bit of a crossweight to it, so there's some vibration. But yeah, 100 has some very interesting stuff, and I definitely want to pick up some more of their rackets. And then finally, last and quite possibly least, just by nature of size, is this J-Nice Sweet Spot Trainer racket. This is the only racket I have from J-Nice, and it is because they had a trainer racket that is supposed to help you train for the sweet spot of a racket because it has a very small face. Yeah, and there's not much to say about this one. I mean, most sweet spot trainers are very cheap and just have one color, but this is actually kind of like legit. It has like a nice paint job, and yeah, just use this for warm up sometimes, and you can see how small this is. I can fit this in the palm of my hand. Okay, so that was my racket collection of 2025, at least before I went on vacation. If you want to know what kind of rackets I picked up on my trip to Taiwan and China, then you can go look at that video. I'm going to link it at the end. My collection is constantly changing as I buy and sell rackets, so I'll probably post like updates every year as my collection changes. I hope you guys enjoyed this tour of my collection, and if you have any comments or questions, let me know in the comments below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.